I'd been credentialed to the Tessari Concord for 6 years before I understood that the Inner Council did not meet to decide things. It met to confirm things that had already been decided in rooms smaller than this one, by people whose names never appeared on the agenda. The vote that morning was item 11 of 14, routine reclassification the docket called it. Administrative housekeeping. Chamber was a long oval of pale stone, ringed by a single tier of seats that curved up and away from the floor so that everyone on the council, faintly down at whoever stood below them. Above the dome was clear, and beyond the glass the harbor traffic moved in slow gold lines against a sky the color of weak tea. I sat in the gallery reserved for accredited observers, 3 rows behind the human delegation, close enough to see the back of Ambassador Voss's neck, and the careful stillness of her hands on the table in front of her. The Concord's classification system ran on 4 tiers. Tier 1, existential threat, full spectrum monitoring. Tier 2, strategic concern, active tracking. Tier 3, noted presence, periodic review. Tier 4, negligible, no tracking, no review. The instrument simply stopped looking. Earth had been Tier 3 for 11 years. Since first contact, since the long, slow process of treaties and trade missions, and the careful cataloging of what we were and what we wanted. Tier 3 meant the Concord kept watching. It meant somebody, somewhere, still thought we mattered enough to count. Item 11 proposed moving us to Tier 4. The counselor who read the motion was an old Tessari named Bryn Othakal, robes the deep blue of the senior administrative caste, voice like gravel underwater. He read from a prepared summary. Earth's military capacity assessed as regionally confined, technological growth curve flattening relative to Concord median, no indication of expansionist intent, recommend reclassification to negligible status, effective upon ratification. He did not look at the human delegation while he read it. Nobody did. That was the thing about Tier 4. It wasn't an insult. An insult would have required someone to think of us at all. I watched Voss. She did not move. She had not moved through the entire session, through the readings of items 9 and 10, through the long administrative drone of a body that had stopped pretending its decisions were anything but already made. Beside her, the delegation's military liaison, a broad, quiet man named Reyes, kept his eyes on the table. The motion is read, Othakal said. There are objections from the floor? The floor meant the human delegation. It always did, for items concerning Earth. It was a courtesy, the kind extended to a guest who has already been told what time the car is leaving. Voss said nothing. The silence ran 4 seconds, 5, long enough that I felt it in the gallery. A small collective shift, the sense of a room waiting for something that was not going to come. Othakal's gaze finally crossed to her, briefly, the look of a man confirming that a formality had been completed correctly. No objection noted, he said. The motion carries. Earth is reclassified Tier 4, negligible, effective immediately. The chamber will proceed to item 12. And that was it. 11 years of treaties, trade missions, the long careful work of being seen, ended in under 90 seconds. Shh. With the word, shh, negligible, sitting in the record like a closed door. Voss still hadn't moved. I found that I had stopped breathing properly somewhere in the last minute and made myself start again. The session broke for recess 2 hours later. I went looking for coffee in the observer's annex and found instead a commotion of a very small, very Tessari kind, which is to say, 4 technicians standing very close together near a console, speaking in the low urgent register that species reserves for problems they are not yet ready to call problems out loud. I knew one of them. A junior systems analyst named Pell, young for his caste, had once spent an hour explaining to me, unprompted, exactly how the Concord's threat detection grid filtered incomings and sensor data by classification tier. Because filtering by tier was, he'd said with the particular pride of someone who has just learned how a large machine works, the only way to keep the grid from drowning in noise. Tier 1 and 2 signatures got full processing. Tier 3 got a daily sweep. Tier 4 signatures were not processed at all. The filter discarded them before they reached analysis. It was, Pell had told me, an elegant solution to a resource problem. Pell saw me and went the color Tessari go when their blood pressure spikes, a kind of gray-green that I had learned to read as alarm. You should not be here, he said. I'm an observer. I'm allowed to be anywhere observers are allowed to be. This is not, he stopped. Looked at the other three technicians, who were very pointedly looking at their consoles. The reclassification took effect at the top of the hour. The grid updated the filter set immediately. Automatic, as designed. Alright, the harbor approach sensors cover a 6-hour buffer before they overwrite. Pulled the buffer to verify the filter was applying correctly to historical data because... He stopped again. Because what, Pell? Because there is something in the buffer, he said very quietly, that the new filter is now discarding. That the old filter an hour ago was also discarding because it was tagged as Tier 3 civilian traffic, and the daily sweep hadn't reached it yet. It has been sitting in the harbor approach for 4 hours at unprocessed, both before and after the vote. The vote did not create the problem. The vote simply guaranteed no one will ever look at it now. What is it? Pell did not answer. He turned the console toward me instead and showed me. I am not a technician. I cannot tell you the resolution class of Concord Harbor sensors. Explain the difference between a transponder ping and a hull mass return. What I can tell you is what I saw on that screen. A shape, rendered in the flat green wireframe the Concord uses for unprocessed returns, sitting at anchor in the outer harbor where civilian shipping queues for inspection, and beside it, in smaller wireframe, a queue of others. 17, the readout said, though the count was climbing as the buffer continued to log, returns that no filter would now ever flag for a human eye. The mass figures were wrong. They had to be wrong. I said so. They are not wrong, Pell said. They are simply outside the range the filter was built to expect from a Tier 3 civilian convoy. The grid does not have an error state for too large. It has tiers. Tier 3 civilian traffic is expected to be small. This is not small. The system does not have a category for what this is. So when the reclassification took effect, it did not flag the contradiction. It simply stopped looking the way it was told to. I asked him how long the convoy had been there. He checked. The earliest return in the buffer is 6 hours old. There may be earlier returns outside the buffer window. We would have to pull archival logs to know, and archival logs for Tier 3 traffic are retained for 90 days before review. He looked at me. The human delegation arrived for this session 4 days ago. I did not say anything. I was thinking about Voss's hands, perfectly still on the table, while a man read aloud the word, to negligible. The recess ended. I went back to the gallery. Item 12 was already underway. Something about tariff harmonization on a mining concession, systems over. A matter that mattered to someone, somewhere, very much, and to me not at all. Pell found me 20 minutes later, in the gallery. Technicians did not do. He leaned down and said, very low, that he had brought the buffer data to Counselor Othical's staff, because the discrepancy could not sit in a junior analyst's queue overnight. Protocol required escalation of any sensor anomaly affecting harbor, security, regardless of classification tier, and he had followed protocol, and now he did not know what would happen, and his hands, I noticed, shaking very slightly in the way Tessari hands shake when they are afraid and trying not to show it, which is not very well at all. Item 12 concluded. Othical called for item 13. He did not get to read it. A staffer came through the side door at a pace that was a Tessari administrative aide, something close to a run, and put a data slate in front of him without waiting for the floor to be yielded. Watched Othical read it. I watched the color drain out of his face in the slow way it does when a body realizes a fact has been true for some time, and it simply hadn't been told. He set the slate down. He looked for the first time that morning, directly at the human delegation. There is a matter, he said, and his voice had lost its gravel underwater evenness, requiring the chamber's immediate attention. Harbor security filter has identified an anomaly in the approach corridor. I am informed that the anomaly predates this session's vote on item 11 and that the reclassification has, he stopped. Started again. The reclassification has rendered the anomaly invisible to standard monitoring. I am requesting the filter override for visual confirmation. Someone touched a console. The dome did not change. The dome was glass. It had always shown what was outside. But the threat display overlay that ran along its lower curve, the cyan grid that normally showed nothing but shipping lanes and weather, redrew itself. It filled. 17 shapes resolved in the outer harbor, Then 22, then more as the override reached back through the unprocessed buffer hour by hour. They were not warships in the sense the Concorde built warships. No Tessari hull carried that profile, that mass, that quiet absence of the running lights civilian traffic was required to display. They sat at anchor in a loose formation that had the unmistakable geometry of vessels that were not hiding, and had never been hiding, because nothing had ever asked them to. The chamber went very, very quiet. I have sat through silences in that room before. I had never sat not through, like that. The silence of 100 people simultaneously recalculating something they had taken for granted their entire careers. Othical turned back to the human delegation, his mouth opened. I do not know what he intended to say, because he did not get to say it. Ambassador Voss stood up. She had not spoken since the session began 4 hours earlier. She did not raise her voice now. She looked at the filled threat display for a moment. Not at it, exactly, more through it, the way you'd glance at a clock to confirm what time it already was. And then she looked at Othical. "Thank you for the reclassification," she said. "We'll be in touch about item 11. Then she gathered the single folder in front of her, which she had not opened all morning, and walked out. Reyes, a half step behind her, and the doors closed behind them, with a sound that in that vast stone chamber was barely a sound at all. Nobody called item 13. The session simply ended, the way a held breath ends. Not with a decision, but with the air going out of the room. I filed nothing that day. I sat in the gallery for a long time after everyone else had gone, watching the harbor through the glass, watching the shapes that had been there all along sit exactly where they had always been sitting, patient as geography, while 100 careful, brilliant, ancient minds tried to remember how a filter worked, and what else it might have been telling them not to see. 11 years, he had been Tier 3. Watched, counted, reviewed, and in the 90 seconds it took to vote us down to nothing, the Concorde had switched off the only eyes that were ever going to tell them the truth in time. I think about Othical sometimes, reading that motion, not looking up. I don't think he was being cruel. I think he genuinely believed there was nothing there worth looking at. That's the part that stays with me. Not that they voted us negligible, that they meant it.